Okay, here's something. Do you all remember Zephyr from Film Z? Yeah, you know, big, tough, sweaty guy in a long line of One Piece movie villains that are all big, tough, sweaty guys. Shiki was sweaty, Zephyr was sweaty, Bullet was extra sweaty. Guild Tesoro, actually I don't think Guild Tesoro sweated all that much. I mean, he probably did, but he looks like he takes a lot of hot showers, wears the fancy suits, he doesn't want to sweat through the suits, probably wears really high-class cologne. I mean, he was rich, he lived on a giant golden casino, for God's sakes. The point of this video is I'm sure Guild Tesoro smelled good. Which is actually kind of funny, because that's like the overall theme of so many One Piece movies, and when we got to film Red, Oda actually said, you know, we've done like the last 5 of these with big, giant, tough guys. I'm gonna make the main villain in this movie a J-pop star, like a J-pop idol, and that's why Uta exists. You know, there we go. Just because Oda's like, I'm tired of drawing big, sweaty men. It's like, okay. But remember Zephyr. Okay. So Zephyr, in the movie, was the leader of the Neo Marines, which are like the Marines, but they're new, right? And he had a big, giant mechanical arm, and he punched the crap out of a bunch of people, right? It was an intense movie. I went back and watched the final scene of that movie just for this video. It is pretty metal how at the end of it, Zephyr and Luffy are like completely gassed, and they're just punching the crap out of each other inside of an active volcano. Like that is the most sweaty metal thing you can imagine, just pummeling the shit out of each other. Like, are you giving up yet? No, I'm not giving up yet. I'm gonna be king of the pirates. Well, okay then, your majesty. They're just beating the shit out of each other. And then, oh, that scene where after the fight is over, Zephyr is like, all right, Luffy, you get to go out there and fulfill your dream. And then Kizaru and then Kuzan and a bunch of Marines show up to kill Zephyr. And he's like, all right, Straw Hats, you get out of here. Let old Daddy Zephyr handle this one. And then he dies. Spoilers for the end of Film Z, all right? But he was a really interesting character, especially when you look at the earlier One Piece villains, you know, like Gasparde or going all the way back to El Drago, you know, yeah, like with Guild Tesoro and Zephyr, a little bit with Bullet. Bullet's character was not very interesting, but you could tell they at least gave some backstory for these characters, you know, where they were at, what they were doing, what led them to get where they are right now, right? Shiki as well had a little bit of that, although that might be changed a bit in the manga from the Shiki that we know right now in the Rocks flashback, right? So, a lot of stuff with Zephyr's backstory. I'm not going to go into all of it here because that's like movie canon, but what I am going to say is this. We know that 56 years ago in the manga, Rocks murdered an admiral at the Reverie. Okay? And so that's kind of sparked some discussion, like, who was the admiral that Rocks killed? Now, we have no idea, because all of the current admirals would have either not been born yet or would have been children at the time. Kong is, like, probably in his 80s right now. He was the fleet admiral during the God Valley incident, so that's probably the only candidate for an admiral at the time. Obviously, he wouldn't have been the admiral that Rocks killed, because Kong is still alive. Last time we saw him was right before the time skip. Sengoku kind of hand in his resignation letter to Kong. So, okay, we don't know who the fleet admiral was back then, and we may know, like, one of the admirals, and that's Kong, and that's all, okay? So there's still a few empty spots here, okay? So what if Oda just straight up decided to make Zephyr Canon, make him an admiral, and maybe even make him the admiral that Rocks killed? Not necessarily. Maybe there was, because there would be 3 admirals, right? Let's say Kong and Zephyr, and then there'd be a third one. Maybe Rocks killed the third one. I bring this up because he's a very interesting character, right? Him and Guild Tesoro, I should really just do a dedicated video on both of them because, like, especially Guild Tesoro has, like, an entire, like, not a light novel's worth, but, like, a lot of backstory, almost light novel's worth, compared to, like, a lot of the other movie villains, right? We learn a little bit about Bullet, too, from, like, movie pamphlets and things. He's basically just Kaido. His backstory is he was a super soldier on an island somewhere. But there's a lot lot of stuff with Guild and with Zephyr, okay? So Zephyr joined the Marines at a young age, and we kind of see him rise up through the ranks throughout his flashback in the movie. They kind of talk about him and how awesome he is and how strong he is. Zephyr kind of plays the role of Garp in this movie. Like, Garp is in the movie as well, but he's not really prevalent in the movie. It's not like Garp has this big epic fight with Zephyr. That would have been cool, right? So in the movie, it's sort of painted like Kuzan's master was Zephyr, or all of the current admirals like Akainu, Kizaru, and Kuzan, their master was Zephyr, and he's the one that taught them to be good Marines and to fight and everything like that. A role that would be filled by Garp, all right? So it doesn't really go into a lot of detail here. I guess the implication in the movie is that, you know how you have Sengoku, Garp, and Osuru that all join the Marines at the same time, that are all like part of the old guard. Sengoku was the fleet admiral. Garp could have been an admiral, definitely. He just chose to turn it down. Osuru's a vice admiral as well. She's the great tactician. She's really highly ranked and revered in the Marines. She used to chase around Doflamingo, was like her arch rival, right? Zephyr would have been like a contemporary to them. He would have been like around the same age, all right? So you would obviously have to change a lot of this around in the canon of the manga because Garp was Kuzan's master, not Zephyr, right? Like, that's the way it goes. But you could very easily use his character design and his overall personality and maybe even the giant buster arm he had. You could utilize all of that. You could say 56 years ago, there was an admiral named Zephyr, had a giant, metal arm contraption, and his backstory is different, but still relatively the same. Like, he had a strong ideal of what justice is, and we see in the flashback at the very end of the movie when he was a little kid, he was like, I am a superhero, and I'm going to protect the innocent, and all that kind of stuff. You could still all have that with Zephyr, right? And in fact, something that you could do, instead of making Zephyr the mentor or the teacher of Kuzan and Borsalino, you could make Zephyr the teacher of Garp and Sengoku and Osuru, because they had to learn how to be good Marines too. Who taught Garp how to punch things? Garp didn't have anybody to teach him. He just, as soon as he was born, Garp started punching rocks. Just like, yeah. That would just be really funny. That's like a Broly Goku situation. Like, Garp was born and like Rox was born, and they're like right next to each other in the nursery, and Garp is like punching the crap out of Rox, and Rox is like, no, quit it. And then years later, God Valley happens, and it all comes full circle. We actually don't know how old Rox is. I would assume he's right around the same age as like Roger and Garp would be. So if he's still alive today, he'd be like in his late 70s, some such. Around God Valley, he was probably around age 40. Mid 40s, something like that. Okay. But anyway, yeah, you could easily do that. So here's something else interesting. 56 years ago was also the year when Garp and Sengoku and Osuru joined the Marines. All right, that is in the timeline. That's when that happened, okay? They were all in like their early 20s when that happened. Garp was 22, Sengoku was 23, Osuru was 20, and they joined together, okay? So let's assume at that time there was a fleet admiral that we don't know about. Kong was one of the admirals, Zephyr was another admiral, and then there was a third admiral. So we're going to go from two perspectives here. Perspective number one, option A. The third admiral was the one that was killed by Rox that same year. And that is what motivated Garp, Sengoku, and Osuru to join the Marines. Because they saw the injustice in the world. A freaking pirate climbed up to Marijois during the reverie, during the meeting of all the kings in the world, and murdered an admiral. And I'm assuming Garp, Sengoku, and Osuru, maybe they were friends beforehand. Garp definitely had a strong sense of justice as well. And he was just like, oh, hell no, that's not going to stand. I'm going to do something against the pirates of this world. I am going to join the Marines, and I am going to be like the symbol of peace. Garp will be All Might, damn it, right? And so they decided to join the Marines. And then Zephyr, who would have still been alive as an admiral at the time, was the one that instructed them and taught them, and then eventually he retires and he dies. Because in order to be an admiral, you gotta have, like... So in the movie, it was directly mentioned that he was, like, one of the youngest admirals ever. He became an admiral at, like, age 38. All right, 30s is like a young age to become an admiral. All right, all the other admirals that we know of are like in their mid to late 50s right now. Aramaki is the youngest, and then Kuzan is also as well 41. Aramaki's 41 years old, and then Kuzan currently is 49, so he would have retired from the Marines when around he was like 47, 48, something like that. But like, yeah, you got to be like at least, I guess, in your 40s to become an admiral. Also, maybe the situation where Aramaki and Fujitora became admirals, that was a little unique because that was part of the world military draft, and that was like new management because Akainu wanted like really strong people to join the Marines to become admirals to fill those spots. So, you know, under normal circumstances, maybe Aramaki wouldn't have become an admiral, but, you know, he is now. Okay. So, yeah, 38 for Zephyr, I think it was given in the movie. That is pretty young to be an admiral, right? So, if he was in his mid-40s, 56 years ago, he would be pushing 100 years old right now, okay? So he's probably dead, and, you know, he died, and then he passed on his legacy to Garp, Sengoku, and Osuru, and now they are now super old, and then they are, you know, the members of the Marines that are passing down, like Takobi and Prince Groose and Kujaku, who is Osuru's granddaughter, and everybody like that, right? Okay. So you could have that, and I'd be 100% okay with that. Perspective 2, option B. What if Zephyr was the admiral that was murdered by Rox? Now, there's some issues with this because I would really like Zephyr to be the one that trained Garp, okay? But if the timeline works the way it is like laid out now, it would be Zephyr was murdered at the Reverie by Rox, and then Garp joins, and then Zephyr wouldn't have been the one to train him. Although not impossible. Remember, like, Garp, Sengoku, and Osuru, they were all, like, in their early 20s at this point. It's very possible they wanted to join the Marines beforehand, right? Just how, like, Luffy, Ace, and Sabo wanted to go out to sea to be pirates when they were kids, but they knew that they weren't strong enough yet. They had to train, and they all decided, like, okay, at age 17, that's when we're all going to leave Fuchsia and head out to sea and be pirates. Okay, we're going to train our asses off until then. So maybe you could have a situation where Garp, Sengoku, Osuru knew each other, and then, or maybe they don't necessarily have to know each other. They might have joined and then met each other there as like rivals and like friends and things like that. But what if you could have had Zephyr training Garp at a young age, and then like you're going to be a Marine someday? Kind of the same thing that Garp was doing to Luffy. Zephyr could have known Garp beforehand and then, you know, trained him to be a Marine, and then Zephyr's death was like the thing that Garp decided, like, the training days are over, it's now time for me to become a Marine, right? Also, given Garp's skill, it might have been very likely that when he joined the Marines, they made him a seaman recruit, but then immediately promoted him to something else, like how the military works in our world. You know, like, you could skip ranks, like if you do stuff beforehand. It'd be like, you're super strong, Garp, and you beat the shit out of so many different soldiers and pirates, and you've proved yourself, and Zephyr was your master. It's like, yeah, we're just gonna bump you up to captain, like, right out of the gate. You're pretty powerful, right? You know, especially, like, Luffy at age 19, look at how strong he is right now. Garp at age 22, I think was already fairly strong enough to be at least a Marine captain. And that was the year he joined, right? So I'm feeling like he spent a lot of his formative years training his ass off, and Zephyr could have very well have been his master there, okay? Something else about admirals, as we're just talking about all this kind of stuff, right? So all of the admirals, not all of the admirals, but the original admirals each had Logias. Kuzan has the Hiya Hiya no Mi, Borsalino has the Pika Pika no Mi, and Akainu had the Magu Magu no Mi, right? Okay. Now, Fujitora has a Paramecia, Aramaki has the Mori Mori no Mi, which is a Logia. Sengoku does not have a Logia or a Paramecia. He has a Mythical Zone model Daibutsu. So, very, very powerful Devil Fruits, if nothing else. There are no admirals that we know of that have 0 Devil Fruit powers, okay? Now, Zephyr, in the movie, non-canon, as of right now, we don't have any confirmation on him being the Admiral, I'm just throwing out headcanon here, he did not have a Devil Fruit power in the movie. He had this giant arm. He had his arm ripped off years ago by somebody that would later become a warlord. Not really sure who that could be. I think the only person it really makes sense to be is either Weevil or Buggy. given the timelines and everything like that, but that'll be probably something they would have to change. But yeah, I mean, Zephyr has the giant Buster arm, and he also has like Sea Prism embedded into that. He had Sea Prism bullets and a bunch of like anti-Devil Fruit weapons and things like that, right? You could easily keep him that way back then. In fact, I would have kind of preferred that. We don't know if Rox has a Devil Fruit power. Maybe he does, or maybe his sword is the thing that has a Devil Fruit power, a la kind of like with Shamrock, or I guess Spondum to an extent. It would have been really cool if like two non-Devil Fruit users just had this big epic melee in the middle of Reverie, and Rox was the one that came out on top. Oh, by the way, I just kind of realized this looking back at the chapter, because we get the explanation that he murdered an admiral, and then in the following chapters when we see Rox meeting Emu and everybody like that, he doesn't look all that injured. He doesn't look that wounded. He doesn't look like he just had a fight to the death with an admiral. He looks pretty energized, in fact. So Rox might have been able to kill that admiral with, like, he might have low-diffed that admiral, is what I'm saying, all right? It's not like Rox is like, man, I just finished the fight of my life. You know, my arm is broken. My face is all covered in blood. He stabbed one of my eyes out. You know, it was nothing like that. He seemed pretty okay, all things considered, after just fighting a fucking admiral. But anyway, yeah. And going back to their Devil Fruit abilities, is it possible, given the fact that these Devil Fruits are so damn strong, and they are Logias, and they are the raw power of the elements, okay? If Devil Fruits are created through human desire, you can bet your bottom dollar the powers of the Logias, the ability to control elements, would have probably been the first ones to be created. Humans, back in the day in antiquity, I want to harness the power of lightning. Well, there's the Goro Goro no Mi. I want to harness the power of volcanoes and magma. Boom, there's the Magu Magu no Mi right there. I want to travel at the speed of light. Boom, Pika Pika no Mi. Really strong Devil Fruits. So are the Marines like going out and just finding these really strong individuals that have the Logia powers? That is kind of what happened with Aramaki and Fujitora. They were not members of the Marines beforehand. I'm just saying, though, we know how Devil Fruit reincarnation works. I'm assuming the world government and the Marines know about this. So wouldn't they want to keep these really strong Logias within their organization, right? Almost like maybe the current admiral has the Pika Pika no Mi, chooses a successor, and then passes on that Devil Fruit, maybe some way to be like, okay, I'll die, the fruit gets reincarnated in this way, take it, receive the power, keep using that power for justice. So we know Borsalino, Kizaru, had the power of the Pika Pika no Mi while he was a Vice Admiral, all right? We know that power. Same thing with Kuzan. He had the power of the Hia Hia no Mi back during Ohara when he was a Vice Admiral. Akainu also probably had his powers when he was a Vice Admiral, okay? So maybe not, unless the admirals, like, died beforehand. It was like, Borsalino, take the fruit, carry on the legacy. But he would have still been a Vice Admiral at that point, and the other Admiral would have had to die, which means there would have had to been another Admiral to replace him in the meantime. Maybe. I mean, like, hey, you don't want pirates to get their hands on these really strong Logias. So even if it's just like, okay, Admiral that has the power of the Pika Pika no Mi, give it to Kizaru, who's just like maybe a captain at the time, or maybe a commodore at the time. He dies, they have to pick another admiral right now, but when Kizaru rises through the ranks and gets strong enough, he will most certainly be an admiral, which is what happened. Also, let's not sleep on Smoker here. Smoker is the only Marine that has a Logia that isn't an admiral. Maybe there was a former admiral that had the power of the Moku Moku no Mi and liked Smoker and trained Smoker. And then he's like, all right, I'm going to die. Or, you know, also pirates could kill admirals as well. I mean, this gets kind of dicey on how Devil Fruits are going to be reincarnated, because what we understand, they are reincarnated sometimes in close proximity to where the user died, and other times they're not. It depends. There's something about it we don't know yet. But what if, like, former admiral died with the smoke fruit, Smoker had it. It's like, oh, okay, master, I will carry on your legacy. But he was still only like a captain. They're not going to promote him at like let's say he was in his 20s when this happened, if it did happen. They're not going to promote Smoker from, you know, a lieutenant all the way up to admiral just because he has a Logia. He still has to rise through the ranks, but it is kind of notable that he has that ability, and I think it's a shoe-in for Smoker at the end of the story in like an epilogue, when Smoker's like maybe like 10 years from now or something, he'd be in his mid-40s, for him to become an admiral, and he would be White Snake. And so that also kind of goes with the Zodiac well, if you look at it. I made a video a while ago about that. So you also have Gion, who is Peach Rabbit, and Chaton, who is Brown Pig or Boar. So in the epilogue of One Piece, not quite to the point where Kobe would be the admiral, but in like 10 years from now, Smoker's probably going to be an admiral, Gion and Chaton, or maybe Kurouma Tensei, who is Black Horse. He might be an admiral as well. And then if we cut even further into the future, like 30 years into the future, 40 years into the future, Smoker might be the fleet admiral, and Kobe will be an admiral. There you go. What animal will Kobe represent? Probably a sheep. Kobe reminds me of a sheep. Like, there we go. All right. So, yeah, making movie characters canon, Shiki was kind of already, like, it seemed to be like Oda made Shiki for Strong World, but also strongly wanted to feature him in the story. He even made an SBS talking about Shiki's Devil Fruit recently. So we're not against that. Also, Uta, there's a flashback during Wano where Shanks remembers a person that's like silhouetted that looks like Uta. So if Uta turns out to be canon, that's fine. A lot of these like recent movie villains are actually very fascinating, except for Douglas Bullitt. But yeah, Gil Tesoro is kind of a one-to-one for Doflamingo, but he has his own story about like his like wife or his girlfriend that got like killed by the world government. So that's very interesting to talk about. We can definitely do that, all right? And Zephyr always had that like real Chad energy, I guess, to describe it. You know, I don't know. He was just like, I'm going to do this my way. I'm going to build a bunch of Marines and take the Dynastones and blow up the world. Or maybe just the Grand Line. It was a little weird. They talk about it like he's going to blow up the Grand Line. I'm like, how do you blow up just like I guess you could with the Dynastones. You could just blow up every island on the Grand Line like a giant ring around the planet, I guess. But yeah, that was insane. That was a crazy plan. But the fight scenes were cool, if nothing else. They had like their own versions of the Pacifista and everything like that. So I would say Zephyr's definitely a fan favorite character out of the movies. Like if you were going to rank all the movie villains, which I have done in a tier list, Zephyr, Gil Tesoro, and Shiki always rank really, really highly for that. So I'm okay with that. What do you think? I don't even know if we're ever going to find out about this. Oda did set up that Rox killed an admiral. I think it's sort of relevant. Like, yes, just from the status alone, killing an admiral is a big deal. But we should also learn about that admiral too. Not right now, but later on when we have a flashback or something. Hey, maybe if we get the flashback from Brook's perspective, because Brook knew about Gunko, and we see Gunko in the flashback. Maybe we'll get this flashback from, I guess, Loki's perspective about Harald's backstory, which is also including Rox's backstory. But then Brook reminisces about this, and then we maybe see the perspective of the Admiral getting murdered by Rox and how the world responded to that. Brook was the leader of a battle convoy for a certain kingdom in the West Blue. A convoy protects nobles or maybe merchants or maybe valuables or something like that, right? They could have been a battle convoy for the Celestial Dragons to Reverie. Brook might have been at Reverie at this time. Gunko might have been always a Celestial Dragon. The implication is maybe she was promoted from the lower realm, but now that we know that she is Saintess Gunko of the Manmeyer family, what if every 4 years the king of that West Blue island where Brook lived traveled to the Reverie? Brook was the leader of the battle convoy. They went to the Reverie. Gunko, ever since she was a little kid, really maybe liked to listen to Brook's music. So every 4 years, Brook would show up to Reverie and be like, oh, Gunko, yo, how have you been? And Gunko was like, oh, Brook, I missed you. Let's listen to some music. And Brook's like, okay, do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. That would actually make a little bit more sense on why Brook didn't recognize her, like, immediately. She wasn't somebody that was, like, you know, growing up in the same kingdom as him. So, like, every 4 years, they would run into each other really quick, but that would just be it, and then he would leave, right? So this whole flashback, Brook Brook being at Reverie, witnessing the death of an admiral. Oh, that would be sick. Let's go with that. This video was kind of scattershotted, I realize, but hope you enjoyed anyway. Thanks, everybody. TechEgg signing out.